No matter who you are or where you go, heading outside even for a few minutes is always worth it. I'm your host, Amy Bouchatz, and here at Humans Outside, we're using the Humans Outside 365 Challenge to build a life around spending time in nature while hearing from fascinating outdoor-minded guests. As a journalist for 19 years, I've let curiosity be my guide. After my husband's injuries from military service, we started looking for a better way to live. That's why we moved sight unseen to Alaska to see if an outdoor-focused life was the answer. Since September 2017, I've personally spent at least 20 consecutive minutes outside every single day, no matter what, to explore how nature can change my life. Ready to hear from experts and outdoor lovers who make heading into nature just a part of who they are while we work to do the same? Let's go! If you've spent any time listening to Humans Outside, you know I love me some data. I love research and the science behind just why it is that getting outside feels so darn good. And I love hearing ways to keep it simple and why keeping it simple is, well, simply the best. And that's why I loved this episode with researcher Dr. Kathleen Wolf. You're going to hear here about the joys and true deep benefits of what we call nearby nature. Here's that episode with its original introduction to Kathleen. Happy listening. When we talk about heading outside, it can be easy to think about it as a trip, a location, or a destination. After all, who doesn't picture the vast American West or wide open spaces just a little bit when they think about the great outdoors? But here at Humans Outside, we're all about getting outside daily. And for most people, that does not include wide open spaces. It includes backyards. It includes city blocks. It includes a balcony or a walk down the street or some grass and a stream in the park. It includes birds and flowers and many other wonderful things. And the key to all of them is that they are right where you are too. One important factor about getting outside daily is to think about outside as right where you are. Also known as nearby nature, the nature that is right outside your door is as important or maybe even more important than anything else. Dr. Kathleen Wolf might know that better than anyone. A research social scientist in the School of Environmental and Forest Sciences at the University of Washington, Kathy studies human use of nature and its benefits. She joined us in season 3, almost 100 episodes ago, if you can believe it, to talk about what the research says about spending time outside daily and whether 20 minutes is a good amount of time. And today she's coming back to talk about nearby nature and how to get the most from it. Kathy, welcome back to Humans Outside. I'm honored to have you here.
Amy, thank you for inviting me back and that very generous introduction, I must say.
Well, not as a researcher, because I'm not one, but as somebody who loves to read others' research, I so appreciate your time and attention on this subject and just spending a little bit of time here talking about it.
Yeah, I'm so looking forward to this. And I might add, as we begin, I'm anticipating some of your questions. And I'll be speaking not only from my own research, but really from the studies that are coming from a community of science that now spans the world. There's just really been a surge of study about those everyday encounters with trees, parks, green space, and whatever, near our homes, our workplaces, our schools, and looking forward to sharing some of the highlights of that.
That's right, because when we talked in 2021, you were experiencing the nature benefits you found through COVID's required social distancing. And you were spending more time in your own backyard. You were spending lots of time kayaking. So I'm wondering if you can start by just filling us in. What have you been up to in the last year? And what exciting things are happening in your research, the outdoor world, and that connection to nature and culture, but also in the research that you've been seeing coming out in this last period of time?
Wow. So let me unpack that a little bit. First, my own experiences of nature during COVID. A group of people, we have continued kayaking, and we have now logged over, well, almost 900 miles in the area around Seattle, central Puget Sound, Straits of Juan de Fuca, and so on. And it's been remarkable because with that intensive level of activity, we have watched the change of seasons, how the water changes, how the bird life changes. And while out doing that, we encounter some places that are not accessible by car, only by the shore. And so we are seeing some massive, beautiful trees, and I've so enjoyed that. And in size, in how they manage their root systems, manage to continue that grip on shoreline rock and steep slopes, and so on. So it's almost inspiring to see that, to see the tenacity of nature, the tenacity of living organisms in the face of COVID and in the face of all the challenges before us.
Hmm.
But then I've also been busy on the work side as well. And in fact, a couple of projects that are kind of, well, they're not coming to a close, but we have data that we're beginning to analyze. One is we're looking at green schoolyard transformation. So, how might schoolyards within neighborhoods be transformed into community parks? So, they're used
Hmm.
more actively after school and during weekends.
Hmm.
Another project I'm working on is with the American Planning Association, where we're attempting to take the extent of nature and health research and translate it into sort of best practices for urban planning to assure that people do have access to nearby nature. The third project is I'm working with a multidisciplinary team, and we're focusing on Iquitos, Peru, where there are these informal settlements, also known as slums, and they're floating communities on the edge of the Amazon River. So we're attempting to understand through health, human health, and ecological measures, what do they gain, what do they benefit from this very direct contact with the river environment.
Hmm. That's so interesting. Very different types of research, but I can't wait to see what you have come out of the schoolyard one in particular, because what an opportunity to have that sort of nature space in a spot that's already designated for play and is already public property for practical purposes, but goes unused so many hours and is right there in so many neighborhoods. So that's really interesting and exciting.
And I'll just mention that you have tapped the key elements of this project in that the schools that we're working on, and they're based in Tacoma, Washington, but we're working with the Trust for Public Land, and they have a national schoolyards program, green schoolyards program. And the selection of the schools was defined by an absence or the disparity of parks distribution within that particular city. So you're absolutely right. Property availability, either maybe there are no properties or maybe they're too expensive. So why not make use of schools in a more effective way for nature
Right.
exposure?
Right. So, speaking of nearby nature, of course, that's what we are talking about today, about nearby nature and making the most of it. So, would you, you've used the term as well already today. Can you start by defining what that is for us? What is nearby nature?
I would have to say that it sort of eludes definition, if you will. It's more of a sense, it's more of an intuition of
Hmm.
what is literally near you, be it near your home or your office or your school, that offers respite, that offers time away from busyness, from the focus of work or school, and enables you to take breaks, be it physical activity, being out in the space, or even simply looking at it or through it. That from, again, this community of science all over the world is suggesting that those are very valuable experiences. And from a physiological sense, reducing stress and anxiety, from a mental health perspective, for some people, reducing depression, from a physical health perspective, literally being in this space, even low grade, if you will, moderate activity. All of this being valuable for health and being offered perhaps by nearby nature. What is it? Trees,
Hmm.
streetscape, parks, and those are public spaces. But in your own yard, if you happen to have a single family home or live in a compound where there are some small spaces, it can be simple as a small kitchen garden, which I have and enjoy dabbling in. Or it can be a bench next to a tree. Really, there is no sort of finite definition to this, but it's where you can access nature, feel comfort within it, feel safe within it, and then begin to encounter some of these benefits that have been revealed by research.
Are you aware of research that looks at why people think about nature as not being nearby? I mentioned in the introduction that I think people sort of get this vision of what nature is, that if they're, and especially if you're talking about being in nature, you don't necessarily think about what's right outside your door. You think about going somewhere, the Grand Canyon or something vast and majestic. You think about perhaps doing what I did, which is moving up here to Alaska to have easier quote unquote nature access. When by doing that, of course, I've realized since then, I've discredited this idea that nature is all around me and it's just me looking for it versus me going to it. Is there research that looks at why people think of it that way? Why people think of nature as being a destination?
That's a really interesting question. I must say that my research has really focused on nature in cities. So it's really focused on this notion of nearby nature. But you used sort of a universal term of why do we all
Hmm.
think about nature as a destination? And my first response is, I think we're distinctive in the United States in
Mm-hmm.
thinking that way because of our wonderful national park system, our state and federal forests, BLM lands, and so on. So we have these nature reserves that historically have been a legacy, and they've actually been a part, I think, of the American identity. And not all nations share that. There are people who come, I've toured around with people who've come from other nations to learn about this national park system. But I have also traveled in Western Europe, Japan, Central America. And in those places, this idea of nearby nature is not, there's not as great a distinction as we seem to have in America, in the United States. And so I this idea of a destination it's a legacy, and I don't think it's as widely shared maybe as you're inferred, because I've done research with people in cities who have never gone to a national park, have not spent much time outside the city. And for them, the city park, the nearby child little playground, a few trees in spaces nearby, that is nature for them.
Mm.
And they're totally comfortable with that. And so I think we have to be careful not to infer our own perceptions and lay them out over other people.
I appreciate you challenging me on that very much because, of course, you're right. That's exactly what I'm doing is saying this is a problem that I have noticed some people experiencing or that I have experienced or I've heard one person say they experience, and so I have extrapolated that to a wide number of wide number of people. So thank you for challenging me on that because of course you would know much better than I as you have done the research, and I am but talking to the researcher, which is the point of this, of course.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, just a couple of examples. My husband works at an environmental ed center here in Washington State, and they have week-long programs bringing children from fourth and fifth grade from urban environments into the center. And there are some groups of children that arrive and they take the entire week just to develop comfort of being in a more wilderness setting. Another example is I have colleagues in the US Forest Service, and they have been investigating what they call urban national forests. So these are places, particularly in Los Angeles, where the city edge butts up right against a forest. And what they're finding is there's some people some cultural groups who are very carefully entering these national forests, not really understanding what to expect, nor what is sort of the behavior that is expected within these spaces. So I find this fascinating, these differences of perception and interpretation of what is nature.
People have access to all levels of nature right outside their home. Well, I guess it's very varied, right? But many people might have a backyard at single family home, like you mentioned earlier, with songbirds. Like that's what I have outside my home right now. It's spring in Alaska, so the songbirds are back, which is delightful. And they're eagerly visiting my bird feeder along with the squirrel, which is, a mixed bag. So Good for the birds though. Um, some people, as you've also mentioned, might have more like a front stoop and some pigeons, which is nature too, but in an entirely different way. So, give us some examples, if you can, of the benefits that might be to both, or are there benefits to both?
And by both, do you mean the larger sort of destination spaces as compared to those places that are really just right out the front door?
Right.
Is
So
that?
I think by both, I mean more what we would think as a traditional backyard with the grass and the birds and whatever it is you have in your own literal property backyard versus what someone might have if they live in an apartment complex and are going
Okay.
out the front door. But
Okay.
still have maybe birds out there, whether they be
Yeah. Yeah.
crows or
So
whatever.
I'll turn that question just a little bit, and rather than sort of describing in any detail what these differences might be, what I think I'll do is turn this to what are the features of nearby nature that appeal to people that you might find in your backyard or in a nearby park or just down the street. Um, how would that be? Could I play with that a little
Oh
bit?
yeah, please. Please.
Okay, okay. So, what do we see as elements of these nearby nature experiences that provide benefit? And, size is not all that important, is
Hmm.
what we're finding. So, what do the studies suggest? There is this idea called attention restoration theory, and it's the idea that respite, time in nature, as a respite from the focused tasks and the things that really deplete our mental capacity. What are some elements there? Well, one is soft fascination. I really like this idea
Hmm.
that you see your own reaction to things that draw your attention without effort. So you mentioned birds. Bird feeders are wonderful because of that activity of the birds, whether the squirrels are in there, nailing the food or not. It is fascinating for some people. But there can also be pollinators, watching bees move
Hmm.
through a patch of grass or flowers, wind in the trees, change of flowers or textures through the season. So, any water, oh my gosh, shoreline, fountains, whatever it might be, water is very fascinating for people.
Hmm.
So, that's one element of it. Another is complexity. So complexity is sort of like Goldilocks. Too much, and we're like, oh, I can't make sense of this. I'm getting away. Too little, and it's like, oh, I understand everything. It's boring. I'm out of here. Mid-level complexity in our environments, people find quite appealing. Some of the recent research about all this is recognizing that in suggesting that biodiversity, a moderate amount of biodiversity in the places where we are located and looking and experiencing, is associated with a little extra benefit for mental health. So, and then another principle is compatibility, that you feel safe within the space, that if you need to sit, that there's a bench located where it's valuable to you. If you are a walker, that there is a path without trip hazards. Say you're an older person. Yesterday, I did a webinar with a group in Seattle, what they're calling an urban village. And it's a program to try to encourage elders to age at home rather than having to be moved to an institution
Hmm.
or a care center. And so we talked a lot about forest bathing that they
Hmm.
might incorporate into their village program, which means if they go to a small woods or a grove of trees and they want to participate in forest bathing, what are their needs? What is the compatibility in terms of being able to walk, to be able to rest once in a while? Maybe there's a restroom, and so on. So, less than what are the particular types of nearby nature, think more about what are the elements that draw you in, that satisfy you, that give you an intuitive sense of better feelings and satisfaction while you're in the space.
Hmm. Hmm. That's a really good perspective. Thank you for that. That's got the wheels turning over here. So maybe
That,
not in a way
that's
that
what
can
I'm all about. Love to make those wheels turn.
maybe not in a way that can turn thoroughly just during this episode. So I might have to mull this further, maybe on my run later, which is when I do all the, I don't know,
Yeah.
decompressed thinking. So
So, mentioning research, there's a lot of research about mindfulness and the role of nature in sessions in mindfulness. I do so much mindfulness in my work, thinking, writing, data
mhm.
analysis. I've been exploring research about mind wandering and mental
Hmm.
health. And nature for me is the time when I mind wander,
Hmm.
when I
Yep.
cycle, when I kayak, when I walk. That my mind just goes to so many places, and I find that's really valuable. But anyway, your mind wandering and your wheels turning, I'm starting to get the feeling we may have a third session, maybe in
Yeah.
another year or so, right?
Yeah, I'm not against it if you're willing, and I think a lot of people have that experience, not to get too off track, but you always hear people say they have good ideas in the shower, and
Exactly.
showers
Yeah.
peak mind wandering time. So,
Yeah, and what we're seeing in psychology is the early literature on mind wandering was it was a detriment because
hmm.
you were not focusing, you're not paying attention. You know, you're a child in a classroom and you're looking out the window, and that's mind wandering and it's not good. There seems to be a shift of late in the role of mind wandering as a balance to focused attention, mindfulness, and so on. So, anyway, the story continues.
This saga.
Yes, it's probably a saga. You're right.
Hey humans, just a quick break to remind you that if you want to build your own outdoor habit, the Humans Outside 365 Challenge is a great way to get started. Cool and exclusive challenge swag, including a finisher medal and a decal, is waiting for you. All you need to do is visit humansoutside.com/challenge. Don't get left out. Go to humansoutside.com/challenge to learn more now. Okay, back to the show. We did touch this in our last episode, but I want to talk about it again. People feel that nearby nature only offers limited options, perhaps, and that they're doing the same thing over and over again while they're outside. And I had asked you about that before, but if we could talk about it again, I would appreciate it because I think that maybe this is a concern for some of our listeners here that they're building this outdoor habit. They're going outside every day and they're just doing the same dang thing on every time, sitting on the porch or whatever. So I'm wondering, is there any negative to doing the same thing over and over again? Or conversely, is there actually a benefit to those repeat experiences? So I'm talking walking the same path every day or that kind of thing.
That's a really good question. And from a research perspective, I'm not recalling any sort of answer to that. But reflecting on the research more broadly, so this idea of Shinrin Yoku, forest bathing, forest therapy, I've come to learn more and more about that because I'm interacting with an international network of people who are promoting this practice and doing research about it. I mean, just 2 days ago, I participated, the wonders of Zoom. I participated on a panel with a couple of scientists who were reporting their most recent research about forest bathing, and this was all hosted by the Korean Forest Service. So I'm interacting with people in South Korea as a part of this ongoing understanding of the role of nature in health. And what I'm learning from forest bathing is attention to detail. So if you think only of, well, I'm going to be walking in the same place every day, this is repetitive, but one can pay attention to different things at a different level of detail. So if you're doing this throughout the year, what are the seasonal changes? As you mentioned, songbirds coming and going. I love that. And then as songbirds are nesting and they're fledging their young, and end of season when they're starting to beef up a little bit to start that migration again. So thinking in a little more depth, paying just a little closer attention to what's going on within that space that maybe you are experiencing repeatedly by choice or by necessity, whatever it may be. And as an expression of that, I participated in a forest bathing session with two guides. These are people who are trained and practice guiding for this exercise. And they were from Singapore and Hong Kong. And we did forest bathing with one tree. We spent 70 minutes with one tree on a campus. So there's lawn all around, and we just sit around. There are like a dozen of us, this one tree, and a series of graded exercises to bring our attention ever more closely to the detail, fragrance, appearance, texture, and so on. And so that's really what I think we can think about this. Another is just be a child, be exploratory.
Hmm.
You look at a kid, kids will sit in a patch, a couple, maybe a yard square, a little larger, and what they see and what they do within that space. So, tap your inner child, if you will, in this
Yeah.
situation.
I have to
Um,
know if hanging out with the same tree for 70 minutes was hard. Was that hard?
I was a skeptic, I have to say. So I was at a conference of forest therapy guides. It was in California, and there were options. You could go to this one where they were going to a beautiful grove. There was where you could go to a more manicured forest, ornamental forest, and then there was the single tree. And I was a skeptic. I was like, I've done those others before. Can they really do this with a single tree? By the end of it, I was all in. They did really a remarkable job with it. And it was the sequence of bringing your attention, not just plop you down and, okay, look at this tree, but it was a sequence. It was a sequence of gradual immersion, different senses, sharing, within a group. That might be another thing, is your experience of this place could become a dialogue with another person. What do they see? What are they encountering? And sharing that. That's quite an important part of the forest therapy experience. So I myself, in my neighborhood, I have about 4 or 5 different walk routes. So I'm a person, the repetition I don't mind to a certain extent, but I need a little more variety to really, I think, gain this benefit. But if you are limited, again, by different circumstances, I think you can find interest in a place that you've been to many times.
So I was thinking while you were talking about the 70 minutes with the one tree about how when we punish children, you might be tempted to put them in a corner, stare at the corner. Or I can imagine being in the park saying, just look at the tree. So
No, we don't want to do that. We don't want to set that
right.
mindset, right?
Right. My sons and I often, especially in the wintertime, because it's very cold here, right? And the woods provide quite a nice windbreak, and so it makes a really pleasant place to go, and you can ski back there. But in the wintertime, we will walk the same nature trail over and over again. And I have found, now that I've been doing this for a really long time, not every day, but over a matter of years, maybe once, twice, 3 times a week, especially in that season, that I can tell when things have changed. I can tell when we go back there, and I couldn't even actually tell you why I know this, but it feels moosey. There is a moose here.
Yes.
It feels moosey.
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 Moose, the definition of moosey is likely to have a moose. So,
Simply
or
said, I get
right.
it.
Or we had a big windstorm come through, and obviously we did not go into the woods then because we have a lot of bark beetle kill trees back there. And I knew that that was going to be quite literally a disaster area for trees just falling in these 100-mile-an-hour winds. And so after the windstorm was over, we did go back there, and we did just follow our curiosity to look at these trees that had fallen, to the point that I went back several times, and my husband and I went on a walk back then. I was like, follow me, let's go look at this, because the way that these trees had just snapped revealed the damage inside the core of the tree from the beetle. And it looked like thin paper inside the tree, just wrapped in the tree because it had been so eaten out. And it was the coolest thing
Yeah, yeah.
inside of these trees. And so we were just wandering, come look at this one. Just like you said, very childlike, very exploration. And it was a wonderful experience, and I got to see those things, and I wouldn't have seen them otherwise. And we just sort of followed our intuition, but knew
Yeah.
where to look because of these repeat experiences. When I first started doing my outdoor time regularly, that 20 minutes a day, which I've now been doing for over 4 years, I was worried about doing the same thing over and over again because I'm such a person who feeds on repeat, on the patterns and habits, and having repeat experiences. And I'm very much tempted at least to eat the same thing for lunch every day and things like that. And so as I wandered back there day over day, I was concerned that I would be robbing myself somehow of having an ultimate nature experience by experiencing the same thing every day and falling into a habit within a habit, if you will. But now that it's been longer than that, I really do think I've experienced exactly what you're saying, which is that I can tell when it's moosey.
Yeah. So, what you have just recounted from your own experience, I have so many thoughts. I'd like to share three if I
Please
could.
do.
All right. First, Moosey, love it. You mentioned you live in Alaska. I have one daughter, and she lives in Juneau,
Mm.
Alaska,
Hmm.
and she is a part-time wilderness guide in the summers. And she takes people out to observe coastal brown bears. And she has taken my husband and I out on some wonderful experiences in berry places. And I know what you mean. There's a sense of, one of those big critters is near us. You don't know why. You can't tell exactly why you have that sensation, but the hackles kind of rise up a little bit on the back of your neck, and you realize there's a bear near us, and
Hmm.
it's darn
Hmm.
close. Second thought is you mentioned these trees that had fallen and observing the impact of the beetles on the trees. Um, I love old, gnarly trees in cities. Our cities now have a policy largely of hazard trees, risk trees, and arborists identify them and they try to get them out as quickly as possible because, we don't want damage to people or property or whatever. But I love old, gnarly trees, and many of them become gnarly because of disease.
Hmm.
They have burls or branches that are misshapen or whatever it might be. And I just, there's a beauty, there's kind of an ugly beauty in some of these really old, beat up trees. But then the third thought that comes to mind is this repetition of observation and opening up one's observances of a place. I've been trying to call up the name of the book, but a gentleman somewhere, I think in the Appalachian Mountains, wrote a book about going to a single rock. He would go to this rock and sit on it and observe what was happening just in this one slice of view off the rock for a year. And the entire book is about his observations and the flow of life as viewed from this single rock. So there's incredible potential in this, and it depends on the sort of place and type of nature that you like to view. But I think even in the smallest spaces that you may have to be in repeatedly, there are
Mm.
these opportunities.
Can you imagine trying to get an agent or publisher to pick up a book about experiences by a single rock for a year?
Yeah, I don't know what his pitch was, but it worked, and it's a wonderful book.
No, I swear, this will be interesting. It's not just a
Right.
rock. I've
Here's
been
the first
there.
chapter. Here's the first chapter. Look.
That's great. What can people do to create a better nearby nature setup or have a better nearby nature experience wherever they are?
Well, I think I touched on that a little early on some of these concepts is think about what is comfortable for you.
Hmm.
Do you need activity? I'm a person, I think you're the same. You like to be moving while you're doing all of this. And might there be a space either within your own property or nearby where you can be moving around comfortably? And then the second is this complexity, thinking about how to, if it's your own garden, how do you introduce? So one of my career meanders is landscape architecture, and there are a lot of design principles about how to layer in sensation, how to layer in experience, and thinking about how to build in that complexity, and then the biodiversity. So not only complexity in terms of layering or a different sort of materials, but maybe biodiversity, because of that, then there's appeal to birds, insects, and other things that lend more to this opportunity for fascination within the
Hmm.
space. But compatibility is really important. Ages and stages. For a young child being out in nature, it's different than for an elder that may be more mobility impaired. And I'm thinking of an example. There's a woman I met in Portland, Oregon, and very active outdoors. She had her first child and realized that the parks that she typically went to were not set up to be within with a young child. No place to change a diaper, no place to stop and feed your child. Ooh, the trails were horrible for the stroller. So
Hmm.
she created a nonprofit called Hike It Baby. And I now understand that there are people who've gathered around that all across the nation to work with parks departments to create spaces that are suited to people walking with children, young children. So that's the sort of thing we think about as compatibility, complexity, biodiversity, and then your own preferences. Maybe you love the color red. So how do you introduce red into your environment? Or maybe like me, you prefer cool colors, the blues, the silveries. How do you bring that into your space
Hmm.
and help it to flourish?
I love that idea of seizing something that you love and that you respond to and putting it in your space. In the summertime, it's a very Alaska thing to do. We buy these huge hanging baskets or plant these huge hanging baskets, and people get really excited about this. They book baskets from the local nursery months in advance. Like I am supposed to go down and pick my basket pretty much now and pay for it so that I can go get it when it's not too cold for it to be outside and it's beautiful. But I love the color magenta, like not pink, bright pink. And I always pick a basket that has that in it so that I can go and sit out there and look at it because it makes me so happy. Um, People cannot see us talking, but I'm wearing glasses and they are the color that I like because when I look in the mirror, it makes me happy. It's the same reason if you really like, you're wearing the blue that you just spoke of, and I wear these glasses because I can see the outline of the frame through them, and I'm literally looking through rose-colored glasses. It's great. So
And I have to say again, people can't see us, but when you talked about your magenta flowers, the look on your face of joy was was so obvious. I'm going to add another opportunity to all this, and that is I've done a couple of studies with colleagues about stewardship, about
mm,
people who go out and volunteer their time and work to restore, recover, manage green spaces. And we did a study here in the city of Seattle, and it's not unusual because I have colleagues who are doing this in various cities across the country. And what we're finding is that there's some stewards that are like, oh, I'll travel, I'll go do that. And there are others like, no, my park just down the street, or my
mhm,
little forest grove just down the street. I go there. That's what I do. It's my place. So they're combining the nearby nature, they're combining activity, they're combining familiarity. And it blew me away because we did surveys of these volunteers at various places around the city of Seattle. There are some people that have been working in the same space for a decade or more.
mm,
They bring and there are other volunteers that come to the events. They bring their own tools. They grow plants that other volunteers can put in. So they're incorporating nature into their life in an additional way of propagating plants and sharing those out. They bring food, they bring goodies, they bake goodies, and they bring them for other volunteers that come to these
right,
events.
right.
So, that's another way is find a local group and connect with them because often they're very friendly, very energetic people. And, I mean, instantly you make friends and away you go, and
Mhm.
there's nothing more satisfying than pulling out, at least here in Seattle, invasive plants, blackberry or holly, hauling that stuff out of the ground and seeing instant change. So much of our jobs now are this long progression of activity and you never see any outcome. It's like, oh, when are we going to finish this? You go out and do a stewardship project on a Saturday morning and you see instant results.
That's right.
It's so satisfying.
That's right, and that can be trash cleanup
Oh,
or
more,
invasive
yes,
weed pulling,
all sorts
and
of things.
Both of those, I would say invasive weed pulling's probably pretty seasonal. Depends where you live, obviously, but trash pickup
Yeah,
is a year-round problem. So,
yeah,
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 it is, and it is very rewarding. We do invasive, they call it the invasive weed smackdown, and you go out and you yank out these huge invasive weed plants. The particular one that's a problem is vetch, and it's
yes.
um
Oh, yes.
yes, and it is invasive and it swallows everything, and it is regrettably, I think, very beautiful. So so I'm
Yeah,
battling myself that pull out this flower, it's killing the fireweed, which I love because it's pink. And but at the flip side, I'm like, no, it's this beautiful purple plant. So
yeah,
for the greater
yeah.
good, for the greater good. No, that's great. And also I think the other thing about doing that, other than the instant reward, is that it, as you said, it creates this tie to the other people who are doing it, and it creates a sense of ownership over what you have around you. And so suddenly, even if that nearby nature isn't in your yard, it's your nearby nature because you're the one taking
Yes.
care of it.
Yeah, there is definitely that sense of psychological ownership. You may not have legal ownership,
Right.
but yeah, there's a sense of, I mean, it's stewardship is generally the action about and for nature. But what one hears when one talks to these people, so the way we did our surveys was we actually went to the locations where events were happening, and I would step up to someone and say, we've selected, if you wouldn't mind, if you would fill out this survey, but I'll take the shovel from you and I'll keep working while you do the survey. And, inevitably that sort of warmed up the relationship a little bit, and they'd continue talking after filling out the little paper. And the sense of care, a sense of care for the landscape is also part of this. And I think that probably enriches this sense of the value of nearby nature as well. Might I add one more comment?
Oh, yes, please.
All right. I've begun to think about how to connect the research about nature and health, particularly nearby nature and health, to the experiences of people. And so what I'm coming to realize is the experience of nature is not unlike nutrition. It's not unlike food.
Mm.
So we require quality, good food every day, vitamins, minerals, supply for our energy. Every once in a while, maybe after COVID, we go to the restaurant and we have a nicer meal and we hang out with some people, be it family, friends, whatever. That's another sort of form of nutrition. Then there is the Thanksgiving feast or the big get together, a celebration with people. It's memorable, it's special food. That is the destination nature, if you will.
Mm.
So
Mhm.
the encounter with nature. So if you're committed to nearby nature, it doesn't mean that destination experience is not of value, but it's a different kind and it happens for different reasons. But nearby nature to me is sort of the everyday sustenance that we
Mhm.
need and is valued. And we now know from the research provides a lot of different benefits.
Mhm. Kathy, thank you so much for your time today and for taking the time to share this research with us.
My pleasure. And thanks again for the invitation. And as I said, I have a hunch we might be talking again in the future.
Seems likely. Thanks so much for listening to this week's episode of Humans Outside. Help me out by leaving a 5-star rating or review wherever you get your podcasts. It really does help other listeners find the podcast too. Now, go, get outside. Until next time, we'll see you out there.